Rudolf Steiner wrote the philosophy of freedom to establish a science of freedom. Why do we need a science of freedom? For one thing, we're in a scientific age where if you want to convince somebody of something, you present it in the scientific terms. Another reason, since the time of the Greeks, people have been debating what freedom means. Every great thinker since the time of the Greeks has come up with their view of what they consider freedom to be. When there's no clarity of what freedom actually is, how can you build institutions in a society based on freedom if nobody can agree what freedom is? So it's important to have a science of freedom, to have some kind of an understanding and agreement what freedom is, so then we can take that into the world and build things with it. We can apply it to human development to develop freedom, which is freedom of thinking and freedom of action. Establishing a science of freedom. When we look at the present epoch and the new trends, we perceive that what is lacking is precisely what the philosophy of freedom seeks to achieve. On the basis of freedom of thought, the philosophy of freedom establishes a science of freedom, which is fully in accord with natural science, yet reaches beyond it. What is science? Science refers to a system of acquiring knowledge. This system uses observation and experimentation to describe and explain natural phenomena. On the title page of the Philosophy of Freedom, it says a modern philosophy of life developed by scientific methods. The book describes and explains the natural phenomena of cognition, how the mind works. Steiner used introspective observation to study his own thought processes, and each chapter in the book describes what he observed and how the human mind works. This approach to science is not unusual, especially in the field of psychology. Wilhelm Wundt was considered the first psychologist, and he used internal perception as a way to found psychology. Wilhelm Wundt was a German scientist credited as one of the founders of psychology, who was the first person to be referred to as a psychologist. Wundt viewed psychology as a scientific study of conscious experience, and he believed that the goal of psychology was to identify components of consciousness. Wundt used introspection. He called it internal perception, a process by which someone examines their own conscious experience as objectively as possible, making the human mind like any other aspect of nature that a scientist observed. Now, science gave up this approach because the researchers didn't have a disciplined enough mind and enough focus to make the clear observations that were needed and to describe them. This is what was unique about Rudolf Steiner. He had the power of mind, the sharp attention, focused observation, and the ability to describe the mind in a very scientific way. So he was able to accomplish what other psychologists were not able to because they lacked the disciplined mind. This also means that the hard work of the science has already been done and put in the philosophy of freedom. Because today, it would be hard to find somebody who could make these observations and describe them well. Just as it was for Wundt and his people, it was hard to train people and find people who could do this work. If we had to do that ourselves today, we would be in big trouble. But fortunately, that work has already been done by a genius who had the ability to do it. But there is a problem in that this science of freedom has not been cultivated. Otto Palmer wrote this: if this science of freedom does not receive the same intensive cultivation accorded other sciences, freedom will be irretrievably lost both by society and by the individual. Now, you could say this because we don't have people today who could make these observations, and these observations tend to be kind of buried in the book, kind of hidden in the book. The science of freedom has not been cultivated, even though a century has gone by since the philosophy of freedom was written, and there's been pretty much no cultivation of a science of freedom. This is a real tragedy. But we still have the book, we still have the descriptions, we still have the observations, we have what we need to cultivate a science of freedom. All that's needed is for the work to be done. What is a science? The term science refers to the organized body of knowledge people have gained using that system. So we have this body of knowledge, but as I said, it hasn't really been cultivated. Scientific knowledge must be based on observable phenomena and must be capable of being verified by other researchers. Now, the way that's been done is that if you read the book, you can make the observations and verify it within yourself. What gives us this great advantage is that we have somebody that made the observations and described it, so all we have to do is verify it. To cultivate this science of freedom, there needs to be a standardized terminology. I think the terms used in the book relate to today and are still usable. General applicability. Steiner said, I wanted to demonstrate that the concept of freedom is a universal concept. This science of freedom applies to every human being. It's universal. Replicability and prediction. The knowledge in the book needs to be categorized, which I will get into in a minute. It can be categorized into thinking types. And out of these thinking types, when you identify someone of this particular thinking type, in a sense, you can get to know them very well and predict a lot of their thinking. And you can understand their thinking, which is very important in relationships and working with someone. There's not too much work that's been done on thinking personality types. This science is a goldmine for developing thinking personality types, which is really the most important part of a personality if you want to be able to understand a person and why they think the way they do, which then influences why they act the way they do. Part of the work that needs to be done to cultivate this science is to develop the categories of these different thinking types. And part of that work is that thought belongs to a domain. It is essential, if one wants to form a correct idea of what thinking is, to understand clearly that the truth of a thought in the realm to which it belongs is no evidence for its general validity. The reason I'm adding this quote in is because it states that the truth of a thought in the realm to which it belongs, which is indicating we're dealing with domains of thought here. Someone can offer me a perfectly correct proof of this or that, and yet it will not hold good in a sphere to which it does not belong. There are domains of thought that belong in other domains. The key worldview to a domain of existence. If one wants to come really to the truth, then one must try clearly to understand the significance of these 12 typical worldviews, must endeavor to recognize for what domain of existence one or other worldview holds the best key. So there are domains of existence which can be understood through particular worldviews. What it comes down to is that we have thought content and we have perceived content. These are two different domains. Combine perceived content and thought content. This is how we grasp reality and gain knowledge. We have established that the elements needed to explain reality are to be found in the two spheres of perception and thought. Cognition overcomes duality by combining the two elements of reality the percept and the concept worked out by thinking into the complete thing. So here's another mention of two spheres of perception and thought. We have a domain of perceived content and we have a domain of thought content, and cognition brings the two together. Here again in chapter 2, only when we have made the world content into our thought content do we find again the unity from which we have separated ourselves. This may sound confusing, but I'll give you some examples that should make it very clear. For example, domains of perceived content and thought content. Under materialism, you have a domain of perceived content, which is natural phenomena, natural physical phenomena. And to explain that domain of perceived content, you draw from the thought content of scientific materialism. And these two together are the worldview of materialism. Materialism works within a particular domain of perceived content and draws its thought from a particular domain of thought content and brings those two together for knowledge through the process of cognition. Now, another example of realism. The perceived content of realism is the external world, which is the world around us that we see and can think about. Now, the domain of thought content that is the key to understanding the external world, is practical experience. Practical experience is part of our thought content as the mental pictures of experience that we have in life, the memory pictures, makes up our practical experience. And if you want to get something done in the external world, if you want to build some steps or fix a leaking faucet, you draw from this domain of thought content of practical experience and how to get something done. Another example appears in chapter 1, which talks about an act of love motivated by the perception of good qualities in a person, where it states, the perceived content is to observe the good qualities in a person. When we perceive these good qualities, they turn into thought content as a memory picture. We form a perception picture. So in this topic, in the philosophy of freedom, it talks about how love comes out of this. As a result of this, we feel love toward that person because of their good qualities, and then we'll act out of love toward them. But this is just another example of a case of a domain of existence that has a certain set of perceived content and another set of thought content. And the thought content is the key to working in that domain. To develop the science of freedom, these domains need to be identified, because each topic within the philosophy of freedom, there's 12 topics in every chapter, and there's 14 chapters. So each of these is a separate, you might say, psychological domain of existence. They're different states of mind. And each one has its own perceived content and its own thought content. And that thought content is the key to unlocking that domain. So what I've been doing is working on a project to diagram this out for each topic. This one is from chapter 2, contrasting self. And what I'm identifying here is each topic in the book is drawn out of the previous topic. So in the red square there, I have the previous topic, which was it was a view that shifted away from our consciousness. So now the following topic kind of remedies the previous topic. So in this topic, it shifts toward consciousness. The individual experiences a polarity of consciousness. He feels a separation as a result of a polarity of consciousness between the observed world and his own thought, his own world of ideas. And this is the result of contrasting himself with the world. He contrasts the self with the world. He's producing thoughts that contrast himself with the world, creating an opposition to the world. So that's the key to understand this experience, this feeling and separation which is coming from this polarity of consciousness that we're experiencing. So those two go together in this particular domain of existence. And this is out of the worldview of psychism. So in each topic in the book, these need to be mapped out to understand each domain of existence. Because this is part of freedom, to be able to operate at our full potential of being able to focus and know exactly how to deal with each domain of existence, because we encounter these things in our everyday life. We're moving through various domains of existence and various states of mind. So this gives us the knowledge in how to function and operate at our full potential within that particular domain of existence or state of mind. And each domain has its one-sidedness. In this particular domain, the self is placed in opposition to the world, a feeling of separation. So in the next view, we move to a feeling of unity with the world. What I'm trying to do is chart out how each topic relates to the previous topic and the following topic, and then identify the key elements of perceived content and the domain of thought content. If we have this knowledge, when we encounter this situation, we'll be able to deal with it. Like for myself, I have a good experience with this domain of existence in that when I encounter someone, I tend to want to contrast myself because I'm a strong individualist. So if somebody says something, well, then I've got to come back and contrast myself with perhaps an opposing position, which may not be the best thing if you're one-sided and are doing this all the time, because then you tend to have trouble getting along with anybody because you're always contrasting yourself and opposing whatever they have to say. When you have knowledge of this domain of existence, you can see, okay, you can recognize, okay, I'm contrasting myself. Okay, that's fine. Fine, contrast yourself. But you don't want to be just living in this domain of one-sidedness, constantly contrasting yourself with everything and everybody. You want to be able to be more broad-minded and move in different domains, because this isn't necessarily appropriate in every relationship, in every situation, because you're going to really end up really isolated and all but very alone. Each domain of existence has a lesson and a growth experience. Now, this is the cultivation of this science of freedom is a big job that's ongoing now. And there's a group that's formed at philosophyofreedom.org, a research group, a Science of Freedom research and study group, where I'm posting the latest research, the latest diagrams that get worked out. Anybody can join that group that has an interest in this work to provide feedback, to get access to the latest research for a one-time $20 fee to help pay for expenses. This group is found at philosophyofreedom.org by going to that site, and on the left side box, there's a research and study link. And also at the events link, we have Zoom meetings a couple times a week for anybody that's interested in that, to discuss these things. This is a screenshot from a diagram that's located in the research and study group. So this is just a brief introduction on the cultivation of the science of freedom found in Rudolf Steiner's Philosophy of Freedom. If you'd like to get involved, have interest, or want to support the work, you can join the research and study group or subscribe to the YouTube channel to when I, occasionally post videos about it. But it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of effort to be able to cultivate a real science of freedom. Because I think there's a real need in the world right now for a science of freedom, because things are very precarious right now, and they could go down some very bad roads. If you have any questions or any ideas for future videos, let me know in the comments. And what are your ideas about how to develop and how to cultivate a science of freedom? Let me know. And hopefully I'll meet you someday over at philosophyofreedom.org. And if you're looking for some more study material about the philosophy of freedom, you can find that at the archive over at philosophyofreedom.com.